Hey everybody, and welcome back to Dude's Brunch, your late night morning talk show. I'm your host Taylor, and you're here this week with episode 53, part 2, continuing our discussion with David J. Loehr of the Incomparable. So we're going to drop you right back into that discussion now with our second topic. Alright, our third topic this week comes from Sean. Sean, what do you have for us?
So this week I want to talk about Matt Groening's Does History. So basically I sent out a couple clips. The first one was the clip from The Simpsons. It's called Springfield Steals Their Elementary, back from Shelbyville. I think it was probably from one of the early seasons, season 5, episode 4, if I recall right. But that's not scientific, and don't quote me on that.
Man, that's older than I am.
Yeah. But basically, the story is that Shelbyville, the rival of Springfield, comes over and steals the Springfield lemon tree, which everybody loves. They take it back to Shelbyville, and then Homer and, some of the other definitely established characters in the series go and steal it back from Shelbyville. And basically, the ending of the clip is an old person from Shelbyville kind of telling the kids about this legend, and, now instead of having the lemon tree, they have turnips. The second clip it's called Antique Car. It's from the episode, The Lesser of Two Evils. And it's a clip. It's kind of
from
like
Futurama, we should say.
Yeah, Futurama.
Simpsons.
And it's shortened up a little bit. The whole series is like Fry and Leland Bender go to this, old New York theme park where they kind of go around and see parts of old New York that's historically done. So the clip kind of shows them going to this museum replica of an old car manufacturing plant. And there's robots in there that are dressed up as cavemen, and they have clubs, and they're manufacturing cars with wooden clubs, saying caveman words as we've portrayed them to be. It's just these interesting retellings of history from different perspectives. And the more that I watched these clips, the more I was thinking about it, I realized that Matt Groening really does a lot of these history critique pieces in his shows, more than just jokes, but entire little, minutes of clips of this kind of stuff. So I want to talk about historical fact presented in these ways, because there's been, from my observation, a lot of these new, there's podcasts and television shows and books and all kinds of stuff that have been popping up lately with new narratives of history. So my first question is, what did you guys think about these clips? Did any of the jokes stand out to you? Was there any truth in the way that these jokes were portraying history?
I really enjoyed the car jam joke from the Futurama clip. That might be because I live in Atlanta now, where your entire life is based around traffic. And so, to hear them say, the traffic jam was a common place for the exchange of ideas.
And then everyone's yelling insults at one another.
Exactly. It's well, I guess you could call I-75 during rush hour in the middle of Atlanta an exchange of ideas. It's certainly an exchange of something.
A lot of horns.
Mm-hmm.
I remember driving from here to Orlando one year and staying over in Atlanta, the north side of Atlanta on a Saturday night, woke up at 7 a.m. on Sunday morning, 12 lanes empty, just all the way down through Atlanta. It was great.
That's a beautiful thing.
I did not come back on a Sunday morning, unfortunately.
I think the Futurama one, hits it a little bit better. It's a little bit, I don't know. I think I like Futurama's comedy a little bit more, just because I think it's a little more absurd. Although, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's a little sharper, a little more pointed.
Right. I definitely like the fact that they're in 19 insert number here, Henry Ford invented the car, and it's great. And but it's also cavemen, and it's interesting that it's but it's a 1962 vehicle, and I just think that it's I feel that's how I almost picture reality of thing. I feel most people are you say 1500, 1600, 1700, like, no one's gonna fucking know, like, what happens, like, in any of that zone. Like, there's so much time that we just, like, forget, or, like, we just don't know about, like, just from that we've learned personally. So it kind of feels so real, and it feels like it's almost too realistic, and it's too close to home that people are going to portray cavemen beating cars was how they made the first car.
Oh, yeah. I mean, what I always used to use this example that, 300 years from now, people are going to assume that Gene Roddenberry wrote every Star Trek episode. He was the Homer of the 21st century, the 20th century, because that's all it is. It's an odyssey of all these people traveling, and they find all these things. And, because, I mean, I would hope that all the materials survive in some form, and, you still have the credits, obviously. But it would be so easy to deteriorate to that point of, where it's just, we just know the one name, Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry.
That just makes me think that everyone's going to respect Mark Burnett as an anthropologist or documentarian.
Yeah. Yeah. This is what people did to survive. They went to an island and they fought it out. And whoever was the one who did not die of water exhaustion or water deprivation and exhaustion, they were the ruler of the island. And they did this on islands all around the world.
And they had to democratically choose who was going to die next.
That's right. That's right. Never underestimate the power of the tiki god.
Remember when we used to have islands, everyone? When everything wasn't just like a molten crater.
And the amazing thing was, then there was like other parts of the world where like there were 20 women for every man, and to figure out which one the man would mate with, he would hand roses to all the people who had to leave. That was how they courted in the United States.
People's whole job would be to travel quickly from place to place and try and solve puzzles.
Remember when people had to manually create cheeseburgers?
Remember when we had snow children?
Wait.
Oh.
But you bring up a good point, David, that these examples feel funny and they feel like episodes of Futurama, but it's really not that unrealistic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting thinking about the musical Hamilton, because everything comes back to Hamilton. But no,
it's Hamilton all the way down.
But, I thought about this. I saw an interview with Lin-Manuel Miranda where he said basically the same thing. I asked my 14-year-old. He said the same thing. All they get in school is he was on the $10 bill. He was shot by Aaron Burr. Done. That's all anyone knows about Alexander Hamilton. And, I mean, even just listening to the score from the show and now being able to read it and hopefully see it one of these days. I mean, I may give up my firstborn child to see it, but worth it. But just sort of discovering that, Thomas Jefferson was not the paragon of virtue that all the social studies classes would have you believe. That, I mean, all of these people were human, right? And that's okay. But they're not at all the whitewashed versions you get. And to think, and I mean, it's polished and finessed even for the Broadway show. But, I never, if you had told me a year ago, I'm going to want to read a giant trade paperback sized 800-page book with tiny, tiny print about Alexander Hamilton, I'd have said you were nuts. And I am sitting here reading an 800-page trade paperback. And it has fallen. It is a heavy book. It has fallen and hit me on the nose multiple times when I'm falling asleep. But it's fascinating because this is not the history I learned. And these are not the founding fathers I was told about. And it's fascinating. So, I wonder how much other common knowledge, right? How many things that we take for granted that, we know this, are not what we know, right? And that's what that really points out.
So I guess this is like a really good segue into my second question, which is, with the rise of these alternative history shows and books and podcasts, Why do you think they become popular?
We talk a lot about tracking and surveillance and self-documenting our lives. You know, every couple of weeks it seems like there's a think piece on Medium telling you that you should stop Instagramming your vacation. I just read another one the other day, and I don't even know why I read it. I read the same think piece like every 3 weeks.
Wait.
I know, right? So I think these are kind of like an interesting reaction to that of, well, maybe there's a history that we don't know, and it turns out most of the time there is. And so we either tell a true history that we don't normally know, or we make one up. A really fun example of that for me recently has been Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Mm.
So, I don't know, have you guys been watching that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
I have the opening theme as a ringtone.
Nice. I am 10 minutes from finishing season 2 right now. I actually paused the last episode to record this. And it just came out Friday.
Yeah.
But I love this narrative of a girl who doesn't remember the last 15 years of American culture and now has to survive in New York City. And the best part of the show are all of the things that she doesn't get. Like, there's a whole subplot this season about her realizing that Lance Bass is gay. Because that was her girlhood crush, and all of a sudden she has to reckon with the fact that he's gay.
I loved how in the first episode of this season, she runs through a litany of various things, and one of them is Ninja Turtles. And someone says, "Oh yeah, that's still here." And that's still a thing?
Like, that's just such a cool way to look at particularly the cultural history of the last 20 years that I think you could do a similar thing with a lot of different eras of, you know, not a Back to the Future, like, oh, we brought somebody from the 80s to 2015, and isn't that neat, and self-tying shoes, but I think there's space for more narratives like that.
There's a fascinating panel show from the BBC, which I think some of it is on Hulu now. A lot of them are on YouTube. They've tried to bring it over to different channels, and almost always they get the thing of, oh, it's too smart for America. Well, no, it's not. But you don't want to risk putting it on your network. But it's called QI for Quite Interesting. And the whole gimmick of the show is every question has an obvious answer that we all know, and that obvious answer is always wrong. And it sort of educates you. It tells you what the real story is or what the real details are. And it's cliche to say, I guess, but it is quite interesting. It's very funny too, but well worth checking out if you get a chance.
Have you guys watched Drunk History at all?
Oh yeah,
a little bit.
Okay, so you know about the premise and everything.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that as an alternative?
I find it interesting that, like, almost any avenue you could try to find out about history is going to be better than anything they teach you in school.
Oh yeah,
like for like actual things that are, number one, interesting, and number two, correct. Because I can't wait for in 200 years when they're like, Christopher Columbus just came to America, and he's like, and the Native Americans were like, here, have this whole country. And they're like, okay.
Would you like some corn? Hey, are those tomatoes? Awesome. I think my favorite line, well, one of my favorite lines in Hamilton is just when the king breaks out and goes, "You're on your own." Awesome. Wow. Just out of nowhere. It has, yeah, it's funny. My 14-year-old is not a musical theater person, which I'm keeping him anyway, but, he's kind of bored in school, which I can't blame him because
school's boring.
He is smarter than the school in many ways. And, when the Hamilton soundtrack, I almost said it, when the Hamilton score came, it's not a soundtrack. Movies have soundtracks. The first chance I had to listen to it was late at night. And I was just going to listen to a couple of songs. And he wasn't even going to listen. He was going to put on his headphones and plug into his iPad. And we started listening. We wound up listening to the whole thing and mesmerized. And at the end, he said, "Why can't we learn everything like that? That was great. Could we just hire Lin-Manuel to just like write all of history?" I said, "The man would die because this took him 6 years. My God."
Oh.
But, And it did kind of remind me of, things like Schoolhouse Rock or They Might Be Giants have great albums for kids. On, much more basic things, but the Here Comes Science album is fantastic. I've learned stuff from their Here Comes Science album, and I read science books.
I was thinking of epic rap battles of history as well.
Yeah.
Not always the most factual, but always entertaining and good broad strokes.
And it makes you want to learn more, to say, all right, which of this is real?
Right. And I think that's actually the best part, is that even if it's completely wrong, you're still like, is that true? And then you look it up.
Be right.
And then there's so much more to gain because you're personally vested in figuring out if this is true or not.
Yeah.
Is there... go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, there have been so many ideas for plays or ideas for little details that I've just come across by chance. Usually when I'm writing, I read nonfiction books because I tend to start mimicking the style of whatever I'm reading if I'm reading fiction. So it's like, no, I have to read nonfiction when I'm writing. And just doing that, I've come across so many things that I write down and say, ooh, this would be a good play, or this would be a good detail. And there are things, even in the radio theater, which is silly. It is a silly show, but, Erwin Schrödinger really was in Princeton in the spring of 1937, and he really did have mistresses. And all of the details about Schrödinger's life that are in that episode, that's Schrödinger. I didn't make any of that up. That was where I went, ooh, he had several mistresses. He had the cat dead and alive in a box. There's a bedroom farce in that, with mistresses hiding in different rooms. And is the mistress really there? We don't know until we open the door. But that is straight out of a book. I did not make that up. So, it's wonderful to find those little details and say, ooh, I could play with this. I have a thing about Ayn Rand and Frank Lloyd Wright that I would love to write for a stage somewhere.
Do you think that having this kind of media out there, these alternative histories, is going to inspire? Because I always think about, I always have wondered how people become history buffs. Because I don't really like history that much. I don't find it that interesting. It feels like so much of the history that I've learned has just been the regurgitation of dates and random facts. But when I watch drunk history or read something that's alternative histories, or I'm also really fascinated in the history of science. So I read a lot about Tesla and different scientists and stuff like that. And the more that I read about this, the more I think I actually might be a history buff, but just not in the same way that oh, let's go to Gettysburg. I don't think I'm that kind of history buff though.
That's a really interesting point. I had a professor in college that I really liked, because he was a history professor that wasn't the Gettysburg type. And he was very adamant about, I want to teach history that nobody else is teaching, and I want to study history that hasn't been studied a million times. And so he and I bonded really well over studying New York in the 70s and studying the punk movement. And I think that's really fascinating history to me that a lot of people don't care about. That's kind of what's so cool about history, is you can be really specialized. The problem is that, when you're 12 years old in social studies class, they can't give you that specialized thing because you have to have this base of the unfortunately boring stuff that everybody already knows.
Right. We got the Civil War unit in 10th grade was literally the teacher reading the name of the battle, the general on each side, how many died, which side won, next battle. That was it. You just took down notes. And it was excruciating. We listened to things like Hardcore History, which is a really good podcast if you like interesting history. I'm trying to think, what's the other one? Is it Stuff You Didn't Learn in History class?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
It's interesting that you said that there, that it was interesting history.
Yes. Yeah, well,
there's this subcategory. There's the canon of history that you learn when you're going through school, and then there's interesting history, the stuff that actually matters, or the stuff that's actually interesting.
Well, and even back in the 70s when I was little, shut up. Anyway, speaking
of history,
so old. And he's kind of almost forgotten now, but there was a radio broadcaster named Paul Harvey, and he had a syndicated news thing in the morning for radio, but he also did this little thing. It was like 5 minutes long, and it was just its own separate little thing that radio stations could pick up, and it was insanely popular. It was called The Rest of the Story, and it was every one of them was telling a detail about some strange thing that you had no idea about from the American Revolution, and this guy who did this, and he doesn't tell you who it is. And then the last thing is, and that young man grew up to be Patrick Henry. Now you know the rest of the story. And every one of them was like, oh my God, I didn't know that. And so it's the same kind of thing. It was like, why aren't we learning these things? Right? This is interesting. I mean, my own obsession is television and radio and pulp fiction history. I can rattle off the names of shows that people who were alive at the time don't even remember. But, I can tell you who created it, who starred in it, how long it ran. I mean, why do I know this? It's interesting.
Tyler, you're the only one who hasn't mentioned an obscure area of history that you're interested in.
I'm interested in the history of obscure history shows.
Oh, you got me. What part of history do I care about?
Say computers. Say
computers.
Yeah.
I feel like you know more about video games than anybody else that I know.
Well, that's true. Well,
and that's probably about Japan too.
That is true. I do want to learn more about Japan and like Eastern culture in general. So, but I don't think I know very much about it.
But even just the interest is enough. I mean, that's. I was always an arts kid, and I was interested in science, but I didn't really care about science until I was well out of school. And I've got shelves filled with, Brian Greene and Einstein and Tesla and, and then it was only kind of accidental to take Tesla and turn him into a radio thing, because the knowledge was already in my head, and it was like, oh, I can play with this and I can have fun with this. And then just weird details. Like I'm working on a story with Tesla right now that's set back in the 1890, I think, when dealing with Edwin Booth, the brother of John Wilkes Booth, who, as it turns out, was great friends with young Tesla. Who knew? But it's like there's a detail, and I can go, ooh, I've got a story, and boom, there it is. That's bizarre. That's, it still kind of amazes me how that works.
So my last thing is, does anybody, I don't know, you don't have to do this, it's not a big deal. Does anybody want to characterize the historic event in a new and interesting way?
Nope.
Kind of fun. Like make it up like on Futurama or anything like that.
Well, I'm doing that on the radio theater. It's fun when I can drop little things like that into these silly shows. I'm trying to think of another good example from that.
So one that I would really like to see, I think I showed this to Sean. There's this great VH1 documentary back from when VH1 made really good documentaries.
Which is older than I am.
Pour one out for my homies.
Mid 2000s. But it's about New York in 77, and there's this great segment where I forget which DJ it is, but it's one of the early Bronx DJs is talking about the New York blackout and how nobody was a DJ until the blackout, and all of a sudden everybody had a brand new sound system and was a DJ. And they tell the story through a cartoon, and it's like a really fun, like Fat Albert style animation. I would love to see the history of hip hop completely told in like Fat Albert style animation. I think it's a really interesting piece of history that hasn't been told, and there are so many loud, bombastic characters in there, like Kool Herc and Africa Bambaataa, and then you get into the gangster stuff with NWA and all that stuff. Like, that could make a really fun cartoon series.
Oh, yeah. I just remembered another good one. About 3 or 4 years ago on Jeopardy, they did a category called Samurai. And apparently at the National Geographic Museum in D.C., they had a big samurai exhibit that spring. And so what they did, all 5 of the clues were video clues Alex Trebek flew out and did them all himself. And the last one he was showing off a full samurai suit of armor that was a gift from the Japanese emperor to Teddy Roosevelt. And it was after the signing the treaties for the Russo-Japanese conflict, or I'm trying to remember now. And as a gesture of thanks, the emperor sent this suit to the White House. When it got there, Roosevelt paused everything, went up to his bedroom, put the suit of armor on, and paraded around the White House to show it off and see what everyone thought of it. And, so I'm listening to this story and thinking, that's insane. That's a detail. And I just put it away. I didn't know where it would ever come back. I didn't, And then, once I had silly time traveling thing, I went, ooh, Tesla's going to meet Roosevelt. Because why not? But that's like the craziest, most bizarre moment, because that's the kind of thing you put that in unless you're a historian who knows Roosevelt or Japanese history or was watching Jeopardy 3 or 4 years ago. You're going to think I made that all up.
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
A side note here. I read over the summer I read, or not over the summer, over the winter I read The Bully Pulpit, which is about Taft and Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And this week they put Taft's car, the first presidential limousine, on the National Mall. And you can go down there and see it. And it's so interesting because it's steam powered, first of all. But I mean, the fact that it was the first car and that like Taft used to love driving in this thing, especially after his wife had her stroke and stuff. But just to go down there, I just sat down there for a while and just listened to what people were saying as they were walking by this car. And it was really interesting to think about, like, knowing Taft's history, knowing his relationship with Roosevelt, knowing his history with Cincinnati, and seeing that, like, why he liked cars, his trips around the world, like, how he got to be the president and later a Supreme Court justice. It just made everything so fascinating. Like, I was just enthralled with looking at this car. Like, I kind of didn't want to leave. It was amazing. And I feel like if this would have been this time last year, I would have just walked by like, whatever.
Yeah. Here's a weird Glenning moment. Every time I go to DC, I go to the Museum of American History because one of my cousins curated the First Lady's gowns exhibit. I don't care about the First Lady's gowns, but I always go and check out the exhibit because there's just that connection. It's like, and I mean, I met her back in the 70s, so it's like she took me through it back when it was in a different building. And, so there's that sort of weird, like, I'm in this building with all of these things. This is kind of cool. Mm-hmm. These are the actual things. That's really Jerry Seinfeld's puffy shirt.
All right, our fourth topic this week comes from Tyler by way of my message to him a few days ago. Not that I'm bitter about it. Tyler, what do I have for us?
Just wanted to let that one sink in, buddy.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so this week I wanted to talk about Space Ghost Coast to Coast and to a lesser extent Adult Swim. So as you may or may not know, Space Ghost Coast to Coast is a absurdist almost sequel to the original Space Ghost cartoon by Hanna-Barbera, in which it's a talk show which Space Ghost, Moltar, and Zorak interview various celebrities, some hits being Conan, people from various popular things such, let's see, the Bee Gees apparently, Hulk Hogan, Slash,
Penn and Teller.
Willie Nelson, which was amazing.
Right.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, very good. I see our guest already has watched the show before, which is really what I wanted to get into.
I lived and breathed that show.
Oh, very good. Okay. So, I guess just to say, have you watched the show before? Did you understand it? Did it make sense to you? And,
hell yeah.
Well, Like, what's your sort of like general experience with this show?
I found it by accident, maybe the third episode when it aired, and this was my wavelength, so I was okay with that. And I mean, I remember Space Ghost from the 70s, so it was sort of like, oh, why is Space Ghost on TV now? Oh, this is funny. Okay. Because it was straight-faced space adventure in the 70s.
So, not to be rude, but roughly how old were you when Space Ghost Coast to Coast was out?
I'm timeless.
Oh no!
I'm on my 12th regeneration. It's fine. It's fine. I'm actually molting, but no, it's perfectly normal.
Oh.
No, let's see. When Space Ghost came on, gosh, what year would that be?
It was roughly the 90s.
94, somewhere in there. So I'd been about 23, 24.
Okay, so you're in your 20s. Good. Okay, all right.
So, I mean, like I said, I watched the original Space Ghost way back. But yeah, this was my wavelength. This was my sense of humor. I mean, I grew up on Saturday Night Live and SCTV and preferred SCTV by far. And Bob and Ray and Bob Newhart and, all these. Here's something that might blow your minds. So back in the early 60s, Bob Newhart was part of a profile in Time magazine with Lenny Bruce as the sick comic minds. And it's like, Bob Newhart? Really? He's not sick?
I was going to say, he doesn't strike me as a sick comic mind at all.
Yeah, but his stuff was just demented and bizarre enough, at least, his stand-up routines, that, it was unlike anything out there. Go figure. And so this was the same kind of thing. It's on that same really unique wavelength all its own. It's straight-faced, but weird. And it's hilarious. And especially taken in context of growing up on Johnny Carson and then watching the Larry Sanders Show. I mean, this is, an absurdist version of the Larry Sanders Show, really, because you've got your producer, you've got your band leader, and you've got your late-night talk show host. It's just the band leader is a giant evil cricket, and the producer is a man of molten lava. It's like, that's, aside from that, it is just the Larry Sanders Show.
See, that's so interesting because I feel like you grew up during like peak, like Saturday Night Live content time. And also you're in like your 20s. I'm like, I was 11 when this show came out, and I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I think this is funny and I think I like it. And I watched like 5 minutes of an episode like the other day, and I was like, this is hilarious. This is great. I understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think I was too young when it initially aired, but now as I've gone back to it over the years, it just gets funnier and funnier as I get older.
I mean, I have the Space Ghost Coast to Coast CDs from when they came out, because they put out a couple of really weird CDs.
What does that even mean?
I know. There were songs, they were original comedy bits. They also did, what was the name of it? It was on TBS in the afternoons. It was like a compilation of, it was like they were hosting a kids' cartoon show. So it would have like one or two Tom and Jerry cartoons or some Looney Tunes, but then they had original interstitial stuff that was like Zorak and Space Ghost and Moltar just hanging out in between filming shows. And that was even more insane. What did they call it?
Yeah, that's like even proto-Adult Swim kind of.
Yeah. Adult Swim literally grew out of Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Right.
Yeah.
There was nothing else then.
But this idea of like the interstitial bits being just as important as the shows,
right,
is so Adult Swim now.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's the same kind of demented wavelength as Mystery Science Theater, which I probably discovered about the same time. And which, that I will say, Mystery Science Theater and PDQ Bach. If you've never heard of PDQ Bach, find him. Those two things really sort of rewired my brain in how to write comedy, and realized that you can just, it doesn't have to be set up, punchline, set up, punchline. It can have a density to it. It can have things woven in and out of it. even more than say SNL or SCTV. Just the density of running jokes in those things, and Space Ghost had the same kind of running gags and things that would come back weeks later, because it was already out there, so they could use it. I always remember the one thing of Zorak going, "You dance like a woman," and Space Ghost goes, "I dance like a woman if she were a man." Well, you got me there. It's like, what does that even mean? But it's funny.
Well, I think that's almost part of it, is that you have to consider not only what they're saying, but the fact that they're also using found footage of a character from like the 70s doing these things. It's like it's everything together makes it funny. Because you see it and you're like, you just hear it. Like, I hear that joke, I'm like, that's kind of funny. But I can imagine the stupid, like, same, like, frames that they use every single time for everything.
Yeah, I think that's the component of it that was lost on me initially, was I was taking it all at surface level. And I think if you want to see this sort of shtick done at surface level, Al TV, Weird Al's short-lived TV show, is a great example.
Yeah.
Where he's reshooting interviews in rooms that look like the original clip and then stitching them together. And it's funny, but it doesn't have the depth that something like Space Ghost does.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fine. Like, that's not Weird Al's act. But at the time, when I was, preteen and teenager, I just wasn't ready for Space Ghost, I don't think.
Right.
Yeah.
You probably also hadn't, like, been forced by your father to watch the original Space Ghost and, like, the other, like, Hanna-Barbera shows. He was like, these are really great, you should watch them. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, I've never seen an episode of the original Space Ghost, actually.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's like Harvey Birdman is a lot of fun, but if you have that base of having seen Birdman and having knowing who Peter Potamus was and who, all these characters that just sort of drop in from all the other Hanna-Barbera stuff. I mean, it's funny on its own, but there's just something about having that in the background where you're going, I can't believe they let them use this stuff. I can't believe they let them get away with this. I mean, I've already looked up the Space Ghost Coast to Coast quotes page.
Oh dear God.
And it's amazing how many of these just pop back into my head before I even finish the whole dialogue. Like there's one where Zorak gets to host, I guess, and Dennis Leary is the guest. And it's like, wow, Dennis Leary, I've seen all your movies. Thank you. I didn't think they were very good. What did you think? It's like, okay.
And I think another piece of it for me is now watching things like Comedy Bang Bang and knowing that they stem from this.
Yeah.
Not to say that I'm a fan of Comedy Bang Bang. I think it has a lot of hits and a lot of misses, but understanding its context makes it a lot funnier as well.
Oh,
right.
yeah.
If there's anything... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say Mystery Science Theater, at least in the early years, a lot of those were films I had seen multiple times on like Saturday afternoon creature features on when you had independent stations showing movies on Saturday afternoons. Dr. Paul Bearer in Tampa Bay with the creature feature.
It's the only reason to ever watch a Gamera movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's Mystery Science Theater.
Gamera is really neat, and he's full of turtle meat. We all love Gamera. Gamera.
Right.
Hi. I'm in a fugue state now.
Almost better than Godzilla. I'm not gonna lie. Gamera. He can shoot fire out of his legs. He just propels himself forward.
The maiden form woman, you never know where she'll appear.
Sean, you were saying something?
I guess until I watched this movie, because I remember Space Ghost being on when I was a kid, and I was kind of like moving over because I didn't get it, I didn't understand the humor. And until I like watched this video and started thinking about this topic, now I really want to go back and watch it all. But I didn't realize that Space Ghost Coast to Coast kind of paved the way for most of what I consume on television now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean at the time it was the only original thing on Cartoon Network. It was all, wall to wall Hanna-Barbera reruns and Looney Tunes, and I mean it's basically what Boomerang is. Well, what Boomerang was 2 years ago. Even Boomerang is evolving. But yeah, at the time it was just this really weird thing they stuck on the air at 11:45 on a Saturday night. It was insane. It was only once a week. And then they had enough that they could double pump them and have a half an hour's worth. But yeah. And then I remember when they announced, we're gonna start this block that we call Adult Swim, and that's the anchor. That's the
See, and I don't remember a time without Adult Swim.
Right.
Which, watching this little mini doc, it made me realize how good I had it. We'll put it that way. Because the content got so much better after that first Adult Swim bump.
Oh, yeah.
And even the style of Adult Swim, I mean, watching that, it's just an 8-minute doc, but it's created in the style where it has the interstitials and everything. And it just made me really want to sit down in front of a TV for 6 hours with like a bunch of junk food and watch Adult Swim like I was in middle school again.
Right.
And you know that half the shows aren't going to be good, but that's kind of the point.
Right.
Pause.
Well, it's been fascinating to watch Archer, having seen all of C-Lab 2021, and remembering C-Lab 2020, which was not very good. And I remember my first thought when they started Archer was like, can they pull this off with completely original animation? Because again, 2021 was all repurposed from C-Lab 2020, and being impressed that yes, they could pull it off, because it's a very similar look and a very similar style, and now it's gone beyond. It's 2021 was like a 10-minute show, whereas this is a continuing story in half an hour segments. And
when I think about many fond evenings spent with Sean watching Squidbillies, and that show could not exist on television without a block like Adult Swim, and without things like Space Ghost to anchor it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you just showed that pilot to an executive, there's no way that show would get off the ground.
But now, even when I look at shows that I really like on Adult Swim, like Venture Brothers, and I think about like how Venture Brothers kind of rips on superhero narratives in comic books, I guess I maybe that's why I really want to watch Space Ghost now, is because like I like that kind of humor. I like that backwards referencing. Like you have a little bit of a knowledge base, and that's what makes this really funny. Versus just watching it because it's on Adult Swim and it's jokes.
Right. Well, it's like the Venture Brothers. I didn't realize at first, and again, I remember when it started. But the guy behind that came from The Tick, the animated version of The Tick, which same basic idea. It's spoof of superheroes and a ridiculous collection of superheroes all fighting ridiculous crimes. And the live action version is fun, but I still prefer the cartoon. The cartoon is beyond weird, in a good way. I'm flashing back to the Little Wooden Boy episode where the Tick gets lonely because Arthur has found a girlfriend, and so he builds himself a new sidekick out of blocks of wood, and he draws a crayon face on it, and his name is Little Wooden Boy. And something horrible happens by the end, and you just have him crying, "Little Wooden Boy!" And, I mean, it is nuts. So to see, it's like, okay, the Venture Brothers is a natural progression from that, right? It's taking the Johnny Quest kind of thing, and the Hardy Boys a little bit, and then going off on its own thing from there. Yeah, it's kind of amazing how all of these things connect, too. And that someone actually gave them money to make them.
Right. Well,
so, a little.
So that's something that I wanted to talk about briefly, Tyler, if you don't mind me
you're
hijacking your topic.
Okay.
In the related videos, when I watched the Adult Swim piece, there was an interview with an exec at Adult Swim about how he made Run the Jewels possible. And so I watched that, and I guess what had happened was LP produced a bunch of music for the bumps on Adult Swim, which everybody knows, lots of instrumental hip-hop and trip-hop and stuff like that. And the Adult Swim building is actually about 4 blocks away from me right now on William Street in Atlanta.
Oh my god.
Yeah, right? And I drive by it all the time. But LP...
You often sit in traffic by it.
I do. I sit in traffic by it a lot. But this guy at Adult Swim ended up hooking LP and Killer Mike up to do one song together for a compilation, and they got along pretty well, and next thing you know, they wanted to form a group, and Adult Swim funded the first 2 Run the Jewels albums.
Oh my god.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And
That's
they
next level.
have like a little tiny record label so they can just do projects like that.
Wow.
With people they know.
And that's like, I feel like that's really how you get stuff done. Like,
Yeah.
it just feels, it just, like, watching that video, just, I was like, this is how, like, art should actually be made. This is like, I mean, yeah, it starts off with, like, literally making no money, and you're literally just making, like, doing whatever, but it's all about giving people a chance. And I feel like that, in a way, I feel like we've lost that a little bit, it feels like, just like how we, back to previous topics, like, 4 in a row dark super, like, Batman movies, you're like, alright. And, or like, there's just so much, like, I don't know, there's so many voices that can be heard, but there isn't, like, enough of them that are, like, willing to give them a chance. I don't know.
I mean, it's not to go back to the radio theater, but that was totally by accident, right? It's a thing that I never thought I would get to write. Clearly, I love writing it, but I never thought anybody would pay me to do this stuff or to let me write whatever I wanted. And it wasn't even in my brain. It wasn't even a thing that I was going to do. And it was only because we did the one April Fool's episode of The Incomparable where it's like, oh, let's do a radio play just for kicks. And people started writing in the next day saying, when's the next one? Like, there is no next one. What do you mean next one? And then more people wrote in. And I'm like, well, maybe let's do a Christmas one. So we do a special. It's fine. And we did a second one. And then all the letters were like, when's the spinoff? It's like, oh my God, there's a thing here. This is a thing. People want this thing. And then, would you do a live show at our conference? Like, okay, sure. And so it's accidental. And, and just the way we're sort of seeing how we can grow and make it into a real thing. And, it helps. I'm friends with the guys who do Welcome to Night Vale. So it's nice to be able to say, how did you guys handle this? How did you turn it into this? And, so, I mean, there will be merchandise. There will be live shows. It'll be great. But
I think that's
totally
an interesting
accident.
point you bring up of you happen to be friends with the guys from Night Vale. And they were an example I was going to bring up of a group of people who had a weird idea and did it for a long time, making no money. But they got to know people and hustled, and now...
Well, they had a basis in theater and a home base to work from and a core group of people that they could use as voices. Mm-hmm. And so it really... all it cost them was the time to do it, right? And they had day jobs. That was just what you did. And it's been the same thing with the radio theater, where we have a core group of voices, and then we have a whole second group of people who want to come and play with us. So it's like, oh, okay, we can work you in. I mean, almost nobody has gotten paid for anything yet, which, we're working on it. But it's easy to do when you have that. It's sort of a pleasure to have people who want to do that just because it's fun. And I know that's how Night Vale started too. It's just sort of finding the will and the time to make the art, which that's not always easy. But yeah, it's nice when you have something like William Street or Jason and the Incomparable, where you then have room to play. You have room to be weird. You have room to try stuff out. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. And you just make the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Because that's the other thing. I mean, and I know this watching my kids who are both perfectionists. And I keep saying, you don't learn anything by being perfect. You don't learn anything by knocking it out of the park every time. The best baseball players in history only bat 300 and 400 at most. You know, it's like you are never perfect. That's okay. And it's from the failures that you learn. And I mean, you can see it in Night Vale. You can see it in radio theater. You can see it in anything like this. You can see it in Thrilling Adventure Hour. The more they do, the longer they go, the better they get. But you know, the highs of any of those shows wouldn't be there if you didn't have those early ones where it was kind of like, we have no idea what we're doing and we don't think anyone's going to listen and we're just going to do this thing to be weird because we like it. And, yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. And a lot of artists need to get over that too. It's like, it's okay to do that.
But the real challenge of creating something is taking all the things that you love and then repurposing them without doing the same thing. And that's what's been so fascinating to me going back to Space Ghost is that it's so close, like frame by frame, to the original Space Ghost, but it's doing this entirely different thing. And it's so close to like a talk show, or it's so close to, in some ways, something like Max Headroom.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But it's doing this slightly different thing that made it what it is now.
If I'm not mistaken, there is an episode where Max Headroom is the guest.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
That's hysterical.
I'm like 99% sure.
We'll have to find that for the show notes.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love about the radio theater was, you know, taking these things that I love that, like I said, I never thought I'd get to do this. But then, you know, okay, I'm not doing The Shadow, but I'm still telling a story that would fit in The Shadow. I'm not doing Doctor Who, but I'm telling a story that would plausibly fit on Doctor Who, right? You know, and then giving them my own little, you know, they're not going to sound like Stephen Moffat or Orson Welles. They're going to sound like me doing that kind of style. But it's fun. And just being able to do a different style every time that keeps me interested. It's like, would I want to do just a Tesla show? Probably not. It'd be fun for a while, but I'd get bored. But, you know, 1 week it's a Western, 1 week it's a PI, 1 week it's a thing. But and so it's like the whole world of Pulp Fiction is there to play with. So why not? And cross them, blend them, be weird. You know, why not?
Yeah.
And you know, that really does come out of watching things like SCTV where it is, you know, dead on parodies of things, or Space Ghost where it is remixing and being really, really weird, but really, really funny.
I think what added, well, just to swoop it on back to Space Ghost for just a minute. I think I found a video, like a 30-minute video, of an interview with the interview that they used for Conan O'Brien. So it's like 30 minutes of them just like asking him this like absurdist questions. And it's like, it's interesting to hear like the unedited version of what he's saying. Like, yeah.
Well, it's great because they would then craft the show based on that interview. Mm-hmm. So, like, Conan had no idea what half of Space Ghost was saying to him until he saw the episode. So they would do the interview and they would kind of get as weird as they could get. And then they would craft something even weirder on top of it. And it's like, if the interview was really uncomfortable, they would make it even more uncomfortable. I seem to recall the Willie Nelson one has like 2 minutes of silence where they're just staring at one another. And it's just like back and forth, and then cut to Zora, cut to Moltar, back to Willie, back to Space. You know, it's hilarious because it is just, you know, it's just that footage. And all they needed to do was just run the camera on Willie Nelson. That's all they did. You know, it's amazing. Right. And Brack, I didn't even mention Brack. My God, there was a show in the 70s that was part of the NBC mystery movie. It's called Banachek, with George Peppard as an insurance investigator in Boston. Ooh. And Brack was obsessed with the show, except he kept calling it Bananachek. And ever since Space Ghost, every time I see it pop up in the middle of the night on something, oh, it's Bananachek. I can't think of it by its original name now. Thanks a lot, Brack.
All right, well, as always, we're going to wrap things up with a round of shameless plugs from the panel. We'll start, like we always do, with Tyler Reed. Tyler, what do you want the people to do this week?
You can find my work at tylerdreed.com for any design or illustration needs. You can also find me on social media at TDR Design on Instagram and Twitter. Anger's dead. Sorry, everybody. That's a fad I didn't want to have die.
It was so close to being a good social network. Sean, what shameless plugs do you have this week?
Nothing so much. I'm continuing to work on my new WordPress blog, the Washington, D.C. street art project or whatever I called it that I have no idea now. But check me out on Facebook and Twitter. You can find me. You can search me by my name. My Twitter handle is at EVANS_MURGE, I think. I don't remember. I'm on there, though, so check me out. That's about it. But if you need any kind of funny political analysis or something, you just want to have a good joke, just hit me up. I'll be happy to screw around on there.
David, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And what shameless plugs do you have this week?
Everything. Watch everything. Oh, wait, no. I would say go visit theincomparable.com. You'll find me on the Mothership podcast, The Incomparable, on not every week, but a ridiculous number of them. And check out the Game Show podcast there, where I host one of the many shows there called Turns Out. And, of course, the Incomparable Radio Theater, which we haven't talked about at all tonight. That would be at theincomparable.com/radio. I write them, I sometimes edit, and I sometimes act, and I should stick to writing, but that's okay.
And you're on Twitter, of course.
And I am on Twitter at DLOEHR.
Very good. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at TCOLMSTEAD, because I have a really long last name. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Dudes Brunch, and like us on Facebook. If you really like what we do here and would like to give us a review on iTunes, that would be great. If you don't like us and you made it this far, you should probably just turn this off and throw your phone into a river or something.
Question all your life choices.
Exactly. Maybe go watch some Space Ghost. All right, thank you everybody, and we'll see you next week for more Brunch. Are you looking up David Duchovny dressed as Warren Tyler?
Yes, I am.
I had to look it up too. I was like, what's going on here?